Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're cracking open a stack of source material. We've got research reports, community insights, docs, network data.
All focus on one really specific bit of decentralized AI.
Exactly. We're going to try and cut through the noise, get you informed fast.
That's the plan. Forget the 10,000-foot view for a moment. We are diving deep into the Bittensor network, but really zeroing in on Subnet 3, you might know it as Templar or Templar.
Right, Templar. It's got this, incredibly ambitious mission, doesn't it? And our sources give us a real peek behind the curtain.
They do.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward. Figure out what Subnet 3 is actually trying to do. Where does it fit in the bigger Bittensor picture? And importantly, what makes it potentially groundbreaking, but also, let's be real, pretty risky.
Yeah, high risk, high reward potentially.
We want to pull out those core insights so you can quickly get a handle on what's really important from all this material.
Okay, yeah, let's set the stage. Because to really get Templar, you need the big picture first. You need Bittensor.
Right.
So think of Bittensor as this unique blend. It's got the subtensor blockchain network.
Yeah.
And it's a peer-to-peer marketplace. But one specifically designed for AI stuff, like inference, training, data storage.
Like a decentralized market for digital brainpower.
Pretty much. And the really bold vision here, it's trying to challenge the current AI scene. The one dominated by just a few huge companies.
Right, the Googles, the Metas.
Exactly. Bittensor wants to build an alternative. Open source, transparent, globally accessible. The goal is basically democratizing AI development and access.
And the engine behind all this is the TAO token, right?
Yeah, PAO is the economic backbone. It's the incentive layer for everyone involved.
So the miners providing compute.
Yeah, the validators check in the quality, the people actually creating these subnets. They're all incentivized with TAO. And it's also the medium of exchange. You pay for digital goods on the network with it. It's used for governance. There's a Senate mention for staking, network fees, the usual blockchain stuff.
And the tokenomics. They've deliberately built in scarcity, haven't they? Kind of like Bitcoin.
That's the idea. Fixed total supply, 21 million TAO. That's it.
And new TAO comes out with each block.
Yeah, about 7,200 tokens per day currently. It works out to 1 TAO every 12 seconds or so?
And like Bitcoin, there's a halving schedule, too.
Roughly every 4 years.
Yeah.
The next one looks like late 2025, maybe.
And the idea there is predictable scarcity supports long-term value.
That's the design principle, yeah. Long-term scarcity.
Okay, let's step back just a tiny bit. The foundation, the actual subtensor blockchain. How's that run?
Yeah. Currently, it's validated by the OpenTensor Foundation itself. They use Proof Authority or POA.
POA, so not fully decentralized at the base layer yet?
Right, and the sources definitely flag this. The vision is decentralized, absolutely.
Yeah.
But having a specific group handle validation is a centralization point.
A pragmatic choice to get started, maybe?
Probably. That's how it's framed. A bootstrap choice.
Yeah.
But the stated goal, the long-term plan, is definitely towards more decentralization, more community control. It's just something you need to be aware of right now.
Okay. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The subnets. This seems core to how Bittensor is structured.
Totally core. They're like the building blocks.
Yeah.
They're modular, kind of independent units.
And specialized. The sources call them neural networks, focusing on specific AI tasks.
Exactly. Instead of one giant network trying to do everything, Bittensor breaks it down. Subnet 1 does text prompting. Subnet 24 handles multimodal data sets. Subnet 23 image generation. Get the idea.
So each one is its own little AI microeconomy.
Kind of, yeah. Each one is created by a team, and they set the rules. They define the unique incentive mechanism.
So they decide what work the miners do.
Right. And the criteria the validators use to judge the quality of that work.
And then miners compete, validators evaluate, and rewards get handed out.
Yep. Based on consensus rankings. And those rewards, they can be TAO, or under this new DTAO system we'll get into, they can be the subnet's own alpha token.
And anyone can start one if they have the skills and the cash.
That's the permissionless part. If you've got the technical ability and the resources, yeah, you can propose and launch a new subnet.
Which must lead to a ton of experimentation.
It does. Rapid experimentation across all sorts of AI fields. That's the idea.
But potentially messy, too.
Oh, for sure. It's dynamic. We'll touch on that. But the goal is that competition and specialization drive innovation. Plus, you're starting to see tools like Subnet's API that suggest maybe these subnets can start talking to each other, combining services down the line.
Which ties right back into the value of the whole thing.
Exactly. Each subnet is a little digital commodity market. their collective health, the actual utility they provide, their market value, especially under DTAO, that all adds up to the value of Bittensor overall.
Okay, let's zoom in this. Specifically Subnet 3, Templar, also called Good Templar, NetUID 3.
Right. Well, other subnets are doing text or images. SN3 has this one, super demanding focus. Distributed AI model training.
Model training? You mean like training the huge foundational models, like GPT-4 scale stuff? That sounds incredibly hard to do decentralized.
It is incredibly ambitious. The sources call it a pioneer in distributed AI model training. And the goal is explicit. Train bigger and bigger, more sophisticated models over time.
And they have a roadmap for that size increase.
They do. Currently working on, I think, a 1.2 billion parameter model. But the plans mention scaling up to 8 billion and a huge leap to 70 billion parameters. Yeah. And maybe even beyond that.
Wow. So they're really targeting foundational or at least near foundational model scale.
Seems like it. And they're not just talking about initial training either. The roadmap includes things like mid-training, so fine-tuning models that already exist, and post-training stuff like optimization, alignment, make models safe and useful.
And the ultimate vision, according to these sources,
to become, and this is a quote, the best platform in the world for training models. They talk about attracting top research teams, frontier teams, who would use the subnet's own token, Gold Templar, to access these capabilities.
That's a big claim. But strategically, it makes sense. Centralized training is insanely expensive and controlled by a few players.
Exactly. It requires massive capital, huge infrastructure, concentrated power. If someone could build a successful decentralized alternative, that could genuinely democratize access, lower the barriers for researchers, smaller teams, lead to a more diverse AI ecosystem.
Which fits right into Bittensor's whole mission.
Perfectly.
So technically, how are they planning to do this? Distributed training on that scale?
Well, the core idea is using the distributed compute power from Bittensor miners. That's the foundation.
Okay.
However, the sources are quick to point out that there isn't actually a lot of public detail on the specifics.
Like the secret sauce.
Kind of. The precise algorithms for distributed training, how they manage enormous data sets spread across potentially unreliable nodes, the exact methods for validating model progress securely in this setup. A lot of that isn't laid out in extensive public detail.
So there's a bit of a black box element still. How does that affect judging if it's even feasible?
That's exactly the point the sources raise. That lack of public detail on the core Howard's map makes assessing the technical feasibility difficult. The ambition is clear, the goal is huge, but the specific novel solution for doing it decentrally at scale, less clear publicly.
And what's the current status? The reports mention a transitional phase.
Yeah, it's actively being built and developed. The roadmap involves scaling up those model sizes in phases, adding more services over time. And the community chatter emphasizes, things move very quickly. Information gets outdated fast. You really have to keep monitoring it closely.
What are some key future plans, aspirations?
A really big one is this idea of token-gated access, using the outer Templar token to control access to the models they train.
So if they train a really good, useful model...
You'd need Templar to actually use it.
Okay, that creates real demand for the token itself, beyond just speculation or rewards.
Exactly. If they succeed, that's potentially a very strong intrinsic demand driver, moving it beyond just being a reward token. Another idea is requiring Templar for payment to even use the distributed training service.
Got it. Okay, let's try and pull out the key differentiators for Templar based on this material. First, the obvious one. Its unique focus on large-scale model training. That's a high-value problem to solve.
Right, a critical need in the AI world. Second, it leverages Bittensor's whole incentivized distributed network. If they can make it work, that could offer real cost and scale advantages compared to centralized approaches.
Third, it got that endorsement from Const, Bittensor's founder. That carries weight in this ecosystem, gives it visibility, some credibility.
Definitely. Fourth, that potential token utility, the gating, the payments, if they implement it successfully, that could be a very powerful demand driver for Templar, directly linking the token to the service.
And lastly, its success is really tied up with Bittensor's overall health, right? It's symbiotic.
Deeply symbiotic. It relies on the network, and its success would boost the network.
Which brings us, very neatly, to dynamic TAO, DTAO. This sounds like a massive shift in how Bittensor works economically.
Oh, it's fundamental. This mainnet launch, February 2025 timeframe mentioned, it's a huge deal. The whole point is to decentralize how subnets get valued and how the network's TAO emissions get distributed.
Taking power away from Yahoo.
away from the central root network validators, basically, and pushing it towards market-driven valuation, decided by people staking their TAO.
And this is where the alpha tokens come in, like Botter for Subnet 3.
Exactly. Each active subnet gets its own unique alpha token. And these aren't really meant for trading on, like, Binance or whatever. They mostly live inside dedicated AMM-style liquidity pools on Subtensor itself.
AMM, Automated Market Maker. Like Uniswap, but internal.
Sort of, yeah. Think of it as an on-chain pool where you swap TAO for that specific subnet's alpha token, like S, and the system automatically manages the price based on the ratio of tokens in the pool.
Okay, so the price of Templar is discovered right there in its own pool based on supply and demand between TAO and GUS.
Precisely. If more people stake TAO into SN3's pool, they're adding TAO relative to the existing GUS supply in that pool, which pushes the price of GUS up relative to TAO.
And unstaking does the reverse.
Right. Unstaking TAO, or if people who earn GUS sell it back into the pool for TAO, that pushes the price down. It's dynamic.
And this is how staking works now under DTAO. You stake TAO into a specific subnet's pool.
Yes. You lock your TAO into, say, the SN3 pool, and you receive Templar tokens in return. You're essentially making a direct investment of your TAO into that specific subnet's future.
And unstaking means swapping the GO back for TAO via that same pool.
Correct. Subject to whatever the current price is, how much liquidity is there, potential slippage, all the usual AMM factors.
Wow, okay. This totally changes the incentives for stakers. They're not just staking on the network broadly, they're picking specific subnets.
It really does, because now the overall network TAO emissions, that 7,200 TAO per day, gets allocated to the subnets based on the market-determined price of their alpha tokens.
Wait, so the higher the price of Templar, meaning more TAO staked in its pool?
The larger the share of the total daily TAO emissions that Subnet 3 receives.
Holy cow, so stakers are literally voting with their capital on which subnets they think are most valuable or promising.
Exactly.
And the network automatically rewards those subnets with more TAO to distribute.
That's the core mechanic. And on top of that TAO allocation, each active subnet also emits its own alpha tokens. Like SN3 emits 2 Templar per block continuously.
Okay, so rewards within a subnet come from 2 sources. Its share of network TAO and its own alpha token emissions.
Correct. And then that pool of rewards, the TAO allocated and the alpha emitted, gets distributed internally. The sources say the split is typically 18% to the subnet owner, 41% to the validators on that subnet, and 41% to the miners.
What happened to Subnet 0, the root subnet? Does it still exist?
It exists, but its role has changed dramatically. It doesn't have an alpha token. You can still stake TAO on SN0, but its influence on network rewards and validator weight is way down, like only 18% weighting compared to 100% if you stake into an active subnet's alpha pool.
So they're deliberately pushing capital towards the active specialized subnets.
Clearly, it's a design choice to focus incentives on the subnets doing the actual AI work.
This DTAO system, it sounds fascinating, but also complex. What are the downsides or risks the sources mention?
Yeah, it's definitely complex, and it introduces new risks. The market-based pricing obviously means volatility for alpha tokens. There's a big concern about shallow liquidity in these individual subnet AMM pools.
Meaning prices could swing wildly with small trades, high slippage.
Exactly. And it could make reported market caps misleading if the liquidity is very thin. There's also the risk of subnet explosion. The permissionless nature means you could get tons of low-quality subnets popping up, diluting attention and capital. And frankly, it's just more complex for the average user to understand and navigate all these different pools and tokens. Plus, there's a critique noted that TAO itself might have liquidity challenges, and those could be even worse for these potentially less liquid alpha tokens.
Okay, let's bring it back specifically to Templar, Subnet 3's alpha token. Its value is tied directly to this DTAO system, right? The TAO staked in its pool.
Directly. So right now, the main reason someone would want Templar, the primary demand driver, is basically staking TAO in SN3's pool.
To earn yield.
Yeah, to earn a share of the TAO emissions allocated to SN3 based on its price, and also to earn the Templar tokens that SN3 itself emits. More staking pushes the price up, potentially gets SN3 more TAO emissions, creates a bit of a loop.
So it's kind of like yield farming for now.
You could see it that way currently. But the crucial piece for sustainable long-term value, the thing that could make it more than just a yield farm, is that proposed utility.
The token-gated access to models.
Right. If SN3 successfully trains AI models that people actually need or want to use, and you have to hold or spend AI Templar to get access, that creates real intrinsic demand. That's the key.
And potentially requiring bail for payment to use the training service itself.
That too. It establishes that direct link. Use the service, use the token.
So the value accrual for Gale Templar, long term, it depends on more TAO being staked, sure, but more importantly on SN3 actually hitting its milestones.
Yes, performing well, demonstrating progress on the roadmap that attracts more stakers and potential users.
Yeah.
And then critically, successfully implementing and getting real adoption for those utility functions, the gating, the payments. That's where sustainable value comes from.
The sources mentioned some metrics from a testnet, price, market cap for GAO. How seriously should we take those?
Yeah. It's super important to stress. Any data like that from testnet is purely illustrative. It shows the type of metrics the system uses, but the numbers themselves, likely outdated, from a fake environment, absolutely not investment advice.
Right. Just shows that these tokens will have a price and market cap within DTAO.
Exactly. But what that means in the real world, on mainnet, with real capital, that's highly variable, depends entirely on live conditions, liquidity, everything.
Which brings us back to the core challenge for Go Templar. It needs to evolve, right?
Absolutely. It has to make the jump from being perhaps initially a vehicle for speculative staking and yield farming
to becoming a token with clear, tangible, in-demand utility.
That's the make-or-break transition for long-term value. And it's a significant hurdle. There's definitely a critique noted in the community discussions. Will alpha tokens in general find real utility beyond just farming emissions? Templar needs to prove it can.
If we just quickly compare TAO and CoTemplar side by side based on the source table.
Sure. TAO, network-wide currency, fixed supply, network-wide emission, acquired broadly, traded externally, utility and staking, fees, governance, ecosystem risks.
Templar. Subnet 3 specific, dynamic supply, SN3 emissions plus TAO allocation, acquired mainly by staking TAO in its pool, swappable for TAO internally, not typically external exchanges, utility currently staking rewards, future hopes are model access and payments, risks tied to SN3 success failure, its pool liquidity, DTAO system risks.
That covers the key differences.
Okay. So, with all that context laid out, the million-dollar question, or maybe the 21 million TAO question, is Subnet 3 Templar a prudent investment?
Well, the analysis across the sources lands pretty firmly on one conclusion. Highly speculative.
Highly speculative. Okay, let's unpack that. What's the investment case, the potential upside, the pros?
Well, first, it's targeting a massive market. AI model training is absolutely critical infrastructure for the whole AI revolution. Huge potential value there.
And it's positioned as a pioneer in trying to decentralize this. That's potentially very disruptive if they can pull it off.
It has that strong endorsement from the Bittensor founder, Const, that gives it a leg up in visibility and credibility within the ecosystem, at least initially.
The roadmap is ambitious, aiming for genuinely large, potentially foundational models. That signals high aspirations.
And crucially, there's that potential for strong, direct token utility, the model gating, the service payments. If that works, it creates real demand for BitTemplar.
It's also leveraging the existing Bittensor ecosystem. It's not starting entirely from zero. It builds on that foundation.
It aligns perfectly with the whole decentralization ethos that excites many people in crypto and AI.
And I suppose you could see it as a kind of leveraged bet on Bittensor itself. If the whole network takes off, a key piece like Templar could see outsized gains.
That's the bull case, essentially. Now, the challenges, the headwinds, the cons, and these are significant.
Right.
First, intense competition. They're not operating in a vacuum. They're up against the tech giants, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, with practically limitless resources pouring into centralized training, and other decentralized projects too.
And just the sheer difficulty. Extremely high execution risk.
Immense. Successfully coordinating potentially thousands of nodes to train a massive AI model reliably, efficiently, securely. In a decentralized setting, it's a monumental technical challenge, largely unproven at this scale.
It's cutting edge, which means it might just not work.
Right. There are serious unsolved technological hurdles. Coordination, data management across peers, ensuring the model actually converges properly, validating contributions securely. These are really hard problems in distributed systems, especially applied to AI training.
Plus, it inherits all those systemic risks from the DTAO model we discussed.
Exactly. The alpha token volatility, the potential for shallow liquidity in its specific pool, the constant sell pressure from newly emitted tokens being sold for TAO or fiat.
There's also the challenge of actually bootstrapping genuine utility demand for CoTemplar.
Yeah, just building the tech isn't enough. They need to convince those frontier teams, the actual users, that training on Templar offers real advantages, cost, access, capability over established centralized options or competitors. That requires demonstrating value.
And a point that came up multiple times in the sources, information scarcity.
Yes, the limited web presence, the reliance on Discord or Telegram for updates, it makes standard due diligence difficult, especially assessing the core team's specific experience and track record in large-scale distributed systems and AI.
Which makes valuation tricky, too. How do you value these alpha tokens?
It's complex, very unconventional. It's less about PE ratios and more about market sentiment, staking flows, how attractive SN3 looks compared to other subnets vying for TAO stake, and those DTA metrics: stake, emissions, price, market cap.
And that market cap figure needs a huge asterisk due to liquidity.
A massive asterisk. The sources stress this repeatedly. Shallow liquidity is critical. It means small buys or sells can cause huge price swings, high slippage. It makes the reported market cap potentially very misleading. You can't just multiply price by supply if you can't actually sell a meaningful amount at that price.
The analysis used a beauty contest analogy.
Yeah, for these early-stage tokens, meaning the price might be driven more by people guessing what other people will find valuable soon, rather than deep, established fundamentals, anticipating the crowd.
Okay, let's run through that comprehensive risk assessment, broken down by category, like in the source material. First up, ecosystem-level risks, affecting everyone in Bittensor.
Top of the list. DTAO model viability risks, all those things we just mentioned. Alpha token volatility, the continuous sell pressure from emissions, the danger of shallow liquidity in the AMM pools leading to slippage and manipulation risk, misleading market caps. Also, the subnet explosion risked too many subnets diluting capital and focus. Potential for collusion or gaming the new mechanics, and just the increased user complexity.
Then TAO token price volatility.
Right, TAO is the base asset. If its price tanks, the value of staking rewards, the capital staked, everything across the network gets hit hard.
Centralization concerns?
Still there.
Still there at the base layer. The OpenTensor Foundation running POA validation on Subtensor, that's a known centralization point, though the goal is to move away from it.
Standard network security and scalability risks apply too, of course.
Yep. And there's that critique about potentially misaligned incentives under DTAO.
Right, the idea that subnet teams might focus on pumping their alpha token price to grab TAO emissions rather than building long-term utility.
Yeah, and that maybe the main beneficiaries are large stakers or validators, leaving retail users mostly farming emissions with questionable underlying value. It's a viewpoint discussed.
And that leads to reflexivity.
Exactly. Good news or hype drive staking drives up the alpha price, which attracts more TAO emissions, which boosts rewards, reinforcing the hype, positive feedback loop.
And the opposite happens if sentiment turns sour. Precisely. Negative news, selling pressure, lower alpha price, fewer TAO emissions, lower rewards, more selling. A downward spiral. These loops can be powerful in sentiment-driven markets.
Okay, now risks specific to Templar, Subnet 3 itself.
The absolute biggest one, technological feasibility failure. Can they actually pull off reliable, competitive, decentralized training of 70 billion-plus parameter models? It's a moonshot. The technical hurdles are immense and largely unproven at this scale in this way.
And closely related, team execution capability.
With the lack of public detail on the core team's background and specific expertise, it's just hard for an outsider to assess if they truly have the chops for this incredibly demanding task.
Intense competition, we mentioned that. Giants and other startups.
Yep. Then sustainability of aware Templar value. This hinges almost entirely on successfully implementing and getting real adoption for its utility, the gating, the payments. Without that, its value proposition is weak long-term.
They also have to achieve competitive model quality.
Absolutely. If the models trained on SN3 are slower, less accurate, or just not as good as models trained elsewhere, why would anyone use them or pay for the service with Loop? The output has to be genuinely useful and competitive.
And that information scarcity again, the limited web presence.
It's a risk factor. Makes tracking progress difficult, increases reliance on informal channels. It's part of the pioneer's peril. Navigating new territory means less established infrastructure, often less transparency.
Finally, market and regulatory risks.
Crypto market volatility affects everything, TAO and docs included.
And regulatory uncertainty for both AI and crypto is a constant background risk.
But there's that one specific warning from the community discussions we need to highlight again, the low liquidity risk for new subnet tokens.
The 20 TAO to dust example.
Exactly. It's not just theoretical. Extreme illiquidity in these brand new AMM pools means Tiny amounts of capital moving in or out can cause catastrophic price swings and massive slippage. You could lose a significant chunk of your capital just trying to trade in or out.
So the advice is extreme caution with new alpha tokens.
Yes. Strong advice from community sources mentioned is be very cautious, maybe even wait for liquidity to build up and the market to stabilize somewhat before jumping into these very early, potentially highly volatile alpha token pools. The risk of getting wrecked by illiquidity is real.
That's a stark warning. Okay, let's bring it all together. Conclusion and the strategic recommendation from the analysis.
So to recap Templar, hugely ambitious, targeting decentralized large AI model training, backed by the founder. But it's definitely in a transitional phase, facing enormous technical challenges, economic complexity with DTAO, and significant transparency hurdles.
And based on all that, the final investment recommendation comes through loud and clear in the sources, highly speculative.
Unequivocally. And they expand on that, framing it as a speculative buy with extreme caution.
Okay, who is that potentially for?
Only for investors with a very high tolerance for risk. People who already deeply understand Bittensor, DTAO mechanics, and who can commit to continuous, active monitoring. It's not passive.
Why even consider it speculatively? What's the rationale?
The potential upside is massive if they succeed. It's a pioneering effort in a critical market. It has that founder nod. And the potential for real token utility is there. High risk, high reward.
But the extreme caution part, why so cautious?
Because the execution risks are immense. Can they actually build it? The DTAO system itself introduces systemic risks like volatility and liquidity issues. There are significant information gaps about the team and tech specifics, and the competition is fierce. The chance of failure is very real.
So for most people, maybe those with moderate risk tolerance or less deep knowledge of Bittensor, what's the recommendation?
The monitor closely approach is suggested as much more prudent, watching the sidelines for now.
And if you're monitoring, what specifically should you be looking for?
Look for tangible evidence, more detailed public technical information on how they're solving the hard problems, increased transparency from the team, concrete validation of roadmap progress. Do they actually train that 8B model? Is it any good? Improvement in the 8 Templar market. Is liquidity building? Is the price stabilizing somewhat? And critically, signs of actual implementation and adoption of the token utility features. Are people using it?
And who is this definitely not recommended for?
Anyone risk-averse, anyone looking for short-term gains, or anyone who simply can't or won't put in the time for the continuous research and monitoring required in this kind of fast-moving, complex environment.
What about the long-term outlook? If Templar somehow navigates all these challenges and succeeds, what could that mean?
Well, if they pull it off against the odds, it could become a truly foundational piece of the Bittensor network. It would be a massive validation of Bittensor's core vision, proving it can support these incredibly resource-intensive AI tasks decentrally. It could inspire and enable other complex projects on the network, and potentially carve out a real niche in the growing AI training market.
So its journey is kind of a stress test for Bittensor's ultimate capabilities.
A major litmus test, as the source puts it. Can the network support something this ambitious?
For those few, considering that highly speculative allocation, what are the key risk management takeaways?
Number one, absolutely critical. Very small position size. Only allocate capital you are fully prepared to lose entirely. This is high risk.
Assume it could go to zero.
Pretty much. Second, continuous due diligence. This isn't buy and hold and forget. You need to stay plugged in. Discord, official channels, network data, community analysis. Things change fast.
Understanding DTAO mechanics is essential. Don't invest if you don't grasp how staking, emissions, and alpha token pricing work. You need to understand the system you're participating in.
Liquidity awareness. We keep coming back to this, but it's crucial. Be hyper-aware of the risks in low liquidity pools. Maybe wait for more stability. Understand slippage. Heed those community warnings about illiquidity traps.
And finally,
a long-term perspective. If you do decide to take a speculative position, understand this is likely a multi-year journey with lots of ups and downs. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Right. So, quite a journey through the ambitious world of Subnet 3. Its key role in Bittensor, the complexities of DTAO, the massive potential versus the very significant risks.
It really leaves you with a core question to think about, doesn't it?
Oh.
In these decentralized ecosystems like Bittensor, you have these pioneering projects, huge community excitement, novel economic models like DTAO driving things forward.
Yeah, a lot of potential, a lot of narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But how do you balance that excitement and potential against a fundamental need for, well, verifiable technical progress, for tangible, real-world utility that people actually use. How do you figure out what something is truly worth when the upside seems huge? But solid information can be hard to come by, and the systems themselves are so new and unproven.
That's the challenge, isn't it? Assessing value in the face of ambition, novelty, and uncertainty. Something for you all to chew on.